I'll try and do as best I can. I'm sorry about it. Go. Did you say you need to go to the toilet? You dirty tongue.
That's the toilet.
Yeah.
And the rug. I'm scared. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Can you hold this
Yeah,
for
of
me?
course.
Thank you. Hey.
Oh yeah, fire suppression system. Yeah. 17th century fire suppression system. Right, okay, where are we on now? This is we're now on the upper gun deck. The upper gun deck itself, there are 30 12-pounder guns on this deck.
Oh, thank you.
That's all right, anyway. The further down in the ship you get, will start getting progressively bigger. Okay. The reason for that is stability of the ship, I suppose, if you like. You know, the highest caliber weapon further down in the ship stands for reason, isn't it? Basic stability. Anyway, so there's 30 12-pounder guns on this deck. Now this area here is all cordoned off. This here, in normal day-to-day running of the ship, was the sick bay. So this is where they'd have like cots up here, rigged down here. And as I alluded to earlier on about the canvas not being there, this was open to the elements. Right, so the fresh air will come all the way through, there'll be holes in the back there, so the air would come all the way through here anyway. So if anybody has some sort of contagious disease, they don't want anybody down below living in close confines with all the rest of the ship's company, because they really did live in a very confined space. All right, so instead of passing all this stuff on, so they were basically put up here. So they were put up here to get better or to die, basically, and that's how it was. Now, because the deck above us, this is the sick bay, by the way, as I said, right? Because the deck above us is the weather deck. We're under the weather deck, under the weather. Yeah. All right. Come on, they're all done. It's all good. That's it. But this is where that expression comes from as well. But in time of battle, all this will be taken down again, and all you'll see down here is men manning the guns all the way down. You won't see anything else. That's all you'll get. And of course, down the centre you see the masts coming down, but capstans and things like that. But people running around with armaments, bringing in gunpowder, bringing in whatever it is you're going to fire, you know. And we'll talk about that when we get to the guns in a minute anyway. So just follow this way, please. Around the time of Trafalgar, there was two types of punishment that was handed out to people at that time. One was hang by the neck until they were dead. Just put it quite simply, because it was. People that did something wrong, murder, I suppose theft was also one of these things as well. However, that was at the discretion of the captain on board at that time. But also when you're sort of, if anybody's decided to assault an officer as well on board, that was also a death punishment as well. Right, so they had to be careful what they did. But the captain himself could decide what he wanted to do by way of punishment because he was basically in charge of that ship. He was the law. Okay, so they were articles of war. He knew the guidelines he had to go by, but some of the captains, should they be a little bit sort of ferocious with their tactics or whatever they wanted to do, they could go overstep the mark slightly. Or some of them didn't particularly like doing anything like this, and that's where discipline would probably run riot on that particular ship. So they had to find a happy medium on board. So the punishments they got mostly was the lash. Anything between 12 and 24 was normal. They could get up to 36. Anything over 36 had to either go to court martial or the admiral had to decide. Okay, because that was basically a death penalty in itself, if you like. Something that's basically over 48, it would be. You're talking about your insides coming out with it. It's quite bad. Now, natural fibre cordage itself is very, very rough to touch. Normally, because it's natural fibre, you run your hand up it like this, you could actually cut yourself on it. This you can't, because a million hands have touched this. But natural fibre cordage is like that when you get it brand new stuff anyway. You can cut yourself just by touching it. So imagine that with 9 tails on it, with 3 or 4 knots put in there as well, and some instances a bit of glass in there. All right, imagine that going through your back. It's going to sting a bit. All right, so If anybody did something wrong, they'll put them into irons. They'll put them in irons, so basically their ankles will be attached to something attached to the deck, usually down below in the all-up deck or the hold, to keep them out of the way of the ship's company, usually in the dark. And what they'll do, bosun's mates will turn around while the captain's deciding what they're going to do for their punishment. Will throw a lump of natural fibre cordage at this person and say, make cat o' nine tails for your own punishment. Not bad, isn't it, really? But it's a good thing, because you need to do it yourself, because you don't want the bosun's mates to use theirs, because they'll be the ones that might have a bit of glass in theirs. So you don't want that. But anyway, you needed to make it as bad as you can, because if it wasn't, the bosun's mates will use theirs. Right? So you'll make it anyway, so it's as devastating as you can possibly make it. And as I alluded to earlier on, once you've done all this, they'll come around and check it. Run your hands on there, you can cut your hands on it. So they'll come down here. If it was up to scratch, come on, if it's up to scratch, they'll put it in the bag, ready for the punishment, job done. If it's not up to scratch, bosun's mates will use theirs. So anyway, this one's okay, put it in the bag, ready for the punishment. So before the punishment takes place, they let the cat out of the bag. Come on, there's a few of these. And the punishment took place up there where I showed you earlier on, didn't I? You know, not down here, because down here there's not enough room to swing a cat. Not your ginger, because you think it was the ginger Tom by the tail. That's just wrong, isn't it? Shocking. Anyway, that's where the punishment took place with that. And it was quite bad, like I said, you know. There was, before the Battle of Trafalgar, there were 10 personnel on Victory, done for being drunk, 36 lashes. So a lot of lashes, you know, through their back. And all 10 of them fought in the battle 2 days later. But one of them actually died of wounds in battle. All the others actually, no problem at all, all good. And what they used to heal it was vinegar, brown paper, like Jack and Jill. Imagine when you get your paper cut and you get a bit of vinegar on it, how it stings. Imagine that with lacerations all over your back. A bit nasty, wouldn't it? Right, go to Admiral's cabin. So come here, like each force is used to run this area here.
The punishment area, as we had.
This is the great cabin. So, got four different areas there, 2 there, that one and the other one just here as well. So, great cabin. So, this is the cabin to the Vice Admiral, the Viscount Lord, Horatio Nelson, obviously before the Battle of Trafalgar, obviously not afterwards. But this was his cabin. This area here looks similar to the captain's cabin, which is directly above, but it is bigger because it's an Admiral. Obviously, he's got more space. Now, as far as furniture is concerned in here, there's 2 items of furniture in here that actually belong to Nelson as well, which are monuments to the Royal Navy and of course to the museum as well. So you've got a table just there, there's Nelson's table. They said that he'd have his plans on there when he had the captains of the 28 ships on board here for food and a meal, discuss the battle before it would have taken place, what he wanted to happen during that battle. Big semicircle around the plans, and that was it. Now that table is still being used today by the first and second Sea Lords and the fleet commander when they do their supersessions. So when they do their supersessions, come on board into this cabin here, sign what they have to sign. They're now in charge of the Royal Navy, first Sea Lord pretty much. Second Sea Lord, second in command, etc, etc. And they'll sign all the forms here. It's always at that table. Now whether it's going to stay in that position or just here, depends on whether there's any aircraft carriers or anything out the back there, which makes a good photograph, of course. But it's always at that table just there. So it's still being used today, okay, by our senior officers. And of course that writing bureau just there as well. Nelson wrote his last 2 letters home on that bureau there. One to his daughter Horatia and the other one to his mistress, Lady Anne Hamilton. But nothing to his wife. Do you know what his wife was called, sir? Being an officer in the Royal Navy?
I knew about Anne Hamilton.
Don't say Mrs. Nelson. Sorry?
No,
Her name was Frances Nesbitt. She was known as Fanny Nesbitt. There is a joke, but I'm not going to do that because there's ladies present. It's quite horrible. It's a horrible thing anyway, so I'm not going to do it. But anyway, he wrote his last 2 letters home on that one anyway. Now, as you can see, like I said, about the toilets and all that sort of stuff, exactly the same thing again about the wood, all taken down, wrapped in canvas, put down in a hole, ready for the battle. And all you can see down here, yet again, is just men manning the guns, and that's it. Okay, you'll have steerage as well, where we walked through a minute ago. The first area we walked through is called steerage. Now that's where Mr. Scott, Mr. John Scott, would sit there at work, right, do his ledgers and things like that, and help out the correspondence with the admiral and all that stuff in steerage. It's called steerage because the ropes come down from the wheel, from above, down there to the decks below, etc., and then out to the lower gun deck, out to the sides, and then onto the rudder. And that's how it worked. So you've got that steerage area there. You've got the sleeping quarters there, which we'll see in a minute. You've got this area here, the dining area there. Now, one bit for the Royal Navy Museum as well. If you want to hire that area out, £1,400 a head. But they don't want to take anything less than 30 grand. Before you start doing your maths, it does expand, and we do get lots more chairs in there. Right, before you start going, well, actually, that doesn't make sense. Anyway, but they won't take anything less than 30 grand. So corporate business, royalty, members of parliament been here as well, as recent as Theresa May and all that lot were dining here, Boris Johnson. Yeah, there you go. One of those things as well. So, and that's, you know, and of course Trafalgar Day as well. Trafalgar Day is a big day, 21st of October. Yeah. For the naval officers, it's a big day. First Sea Lord will have lots of people, lots of dignitaries from around the country, even some royalty in other cases, eating in that area there on the 21st of October. It might happen this year, we don't know yet, but that's it. That's the way it goes. So you've got that area there, this area here, which is day cabin. Nobody's allowed in here apart from the admiral himself, unless invited in. And then you've got his sleeping quarters over there. If you want to come have a quick look at it. We need to move on anyway. Just quickly show you on this table exactly where the Trafalgar is. You can see you've got Portugal just here, just here, Scotland just there, the Dizzy's just there. As it is, as you go. Right, so this is his sleeping quarters. Now, Nelson himself, I'll say that the senior officer's bunks were a cot, some for the deckhead to move around like this. Nelson would have had one of those. However, he didn't have one of those because he couldn't get anything.
So big people like prime ministers, they have been dining on this table. It's very expensive to dine on his carriage.
Uniforms out, you know, uniforms drink pour, uniforms drink, well, you know what they were like in the army. Yeah, looking all nice and smart in their red jackets and straight lines and stuff. Yeah, shocking. You get those marching like that here. Job done. Anyway, we wanted something made up similar to that because it could be broken down into small pieces, wrapped in canvas and put down in the hole. Quite easy, right? So that's what he did. So the only difference between Nelson's one and Wellington's at that time was he had blue canvas on his, which would have cost a lot of money in them days to get it all dyed. And probably a lot of urine as well, I'd imagine. You know, in those days, that's how it was. And also he had a little board put in place here, stop him rolling out. You can see it, she's moving around. But obviously, campaign beds, the army didn't have that. So there you go. And on the subject of Wellington, HMS Victory itself, with all the guns are on board, 104 guns. Now, to fire, if you fired all these guns at once, double shotted, would be around about 1.7 tons of munitions leaving the ship at any one time, which was 35% more than all the guns that Wellington had at the Battle of Waterloo, just on one ship. So imagine the firepower of 28 men of war. Absolutely devastating. So just thought I'd get that in there. Big name again.
We can't go on the aircraft, we've got to go.
And it's supposed like a self-contained. There's a toilet there.
bits of kit, excellent bits of kit. But not only is this the place for 24-pounder guns, this is where the Royal Marines would have bunked as well at night time. So the Battle of around about Trafalgar time, there was about 142 Royal Marines stationed on board Victory at that particular time, and that would have been in this area here. The reason why they're here is because the sailors lived down below and the wardroom was at the back. So if there had any of the sailors that had an axe to grind, bearing in mind around 40% of the Navy at that time, people didn't want to be here. Which meant 60% did, which was a good thing, right? They joined up as boy sailors, wanted to join the Navy to see the world, or perhaps because there was food, happy days, and they managed to, you know, camaraderie and all that sort of stuff, all good stuff. But you're looking at around 40%, like I said, either got bombed on the head, sent to sea, or they used to take them from merchant ships. They wanted the best seamen as they could, so if they stopped a merchant ship somewhere, took the best sailors off, we want you because we haven't got enough sailors, they go on board for that because of their seamanship tendencies. But also, they didn't tend to usually hit anybody on the head. It was usually somebody who was a fisherman or merchant sailor. They wanted somebody that was useful, realistically. So that's what they'll do. But sometimes if they're really short on people, that's when they'll get anybody at that time. So they weren't particular on what they would get. So anyway, those people might have an axe to grind, they might want to have a go at the officers. Bearing in mind, there were only 8 officers on board at that time. That was it. 8 officers, and then you had the captain, and then you had the admiral, so 10 in total, okay, on board. So when you've got 850 people on board, they needed to be looked after, and this is why the Marines were on this deck. But only with the Royal Marines on this deck as well, this is where all the food was cooked. As you can see here, we've got the Brodie stove. The Brodie stove itself, it's called the Brodie stove because the Brodie family of Scotland used to make thousands of these for the Royal Navy. Made them incredibly wealthy. So good bits of kit, you can boil up stuff inside there, you put coal underneath there, wood, whatever it is to fire it up, to boil what's in there. 2 big urns there to boil up all the food, so you can have all your vegetables and all your meat and all that sort of stuff boiling in there. So that's where it'll be there. So the cook on board HMS Victory, I think 850 people on board. How many chefs do you think they had? How many cooks?
One.
Just the one. Just a man called Mr. Carroll. Mr. Carroll couldn't boil an egg. He wasn't very good at any of that. But mostly he was in charge of that flame there. So anything that was inside that belonged to him at that time. But he used to have the messes of people. So in those days, a mess of people was the table. So it was 8 to 10 people per table. One person was a mess chef, and they would help prepare the food for everybody on that table during the day. So to help out to do that, to put it in the pot and help out Mr. Carroll and all that sort of stuff. So that's what they would do. So what they used to do, put it in there, start boiling it up. Then Mr. Carroll himself, the only one that could get in close, and because the purser himself used to, at great expense, pay some of the stuff himself, but then he used to make a lot more money back. And that's how it pretty much was in those days. But sometimes, if they were really nice, the pursers, they used to bankrupt themselves. So they didn't pay to be nice in those days as a purser. So they try and make more money back as much as they can. So him and Mr. Carroll would be talking about making more money themselves whilst they're doing things. Okay, just as a bit of a backhander sort of thing. So on there, if you've got like loads of meats and stuff like that boiling up inside there, be horrible stuff. They try to get all the salt and all that out of it. They usually try and seep all that anyway out of the water they had on board. That'll come out there over the top. And you'll have like the slush coming over the top, which is like the fat and all that stuff, and loads of other stuff that's in there, because it would be pretty rancid stuff. But it'll come over the side, and Mr. Carroll will be here with a leather spatula, scraping out the side of the oven, or the cooker itself, like this, and put it into a separate receptacle to save it. So it will then be like lard, if you like, it will solidify inside there, this receptacle, and he will cut it into very small squares, and he will sell little bits like this off to the ship's company to have with their evening meal, which is hardtack biscuit, okay, with butter or cheese and onion and all that sort of stuff. This hardtack biscuit is very hard to chew, so they'll have their issue of rum or issue of beer, okay, to dip it in. Now the ship's company at that time would have an issue of beer, which is 8 pints of strong ale a day, or 2 pints of wine, depending on where they were in the world, and half a pint, 54.5% proof plus as rum, okay. Usually watered down, so it lasts them longer. They'll try and put all this hardtack biscuit in there to try and make it so they can chew it. And it's still quite bad, and this is where this slush would come from. So the money he would make from this slush, it's called the slush fund, right? So half the money will be in the cook's back pocket, the other half will go to Purser, because he wanted more money. Not that he didn't get paid enough as it is, but he used to make lots of money. Like I said, if they were horrible people, they made loads of money, the pursers in them days. But if they were really nice people, they were bankrupt. So it didn't pay to be nice, like I said. Anyway, so meals on board. As you can see on that table there, right, is a square plate. So the square plate there, right, 3 square meals a day. Okay, that's where that comes from there. Now, so I was saying about people getting punishment when they're slopping the food on there. You know, the mess chef coming up here and getting the food to directly take to their areas there. You can't have 850 people queuing up for food. They'll be sat down at the table and they get slopped on by the mess chef. And the mess chef itself will put it on the middle of that plate. Around the outside of the plate, okay, that little rim around the outside is called a fiddle. If you have too much food put on your plate, it's said to be on the fiddle, ripping off the government. Right? That is a lashable offence. Even if you're just receiving it, you're like, that's not my fault. But the person putting it on there will get a lash as well. So they have to be very, very careful on what they did and the amount of food they put on that plate. But also there's a little thumb hole in there as well. So you put your thumb in there as well. Before the food hit the fiddle, rule of thumb, job done. All right? Don't know if that one's true or not. Whether it was that one, I don't know. But anyway, there's lots of these things, human are anyway, so that's where all those expressions come from anyway. So poor old Mr. Carroll, he made a few quid out of it, but he used to have to make sure that he'd douse all this fire in there in time of battle. Should any of that come over and set fire to anything else, he's liable to the lash himself. But he was one of only a few people on board who could carry a naked flame on board the ship. So he could be one of the only people putting these candles on, to light the candles. Not many people are allowed to do it. Once it was in, they were closed. Okay, and the only people to open them were people like him. And they had to open it up with a special key to get in there, blow it out. And they had to make sure they look after the flames and stuff on board the ship. Ship made out of wood, full of gunpowder, don't end well, does it? You know, it's one of those things. Anyway, follow me this way, I just want to point out this gun, actually, while we're here. Because this is the second single's favourite place on Victory for some reason, I don't know why. Anyway, people usually go around with their audio guides looking around. There's nothing said about this gun. Now this gun itself, okay, very special. It's a very special naval artefact. The reason for that is the serial number for this gun puts this gun to the Victory, Battle of Trafalgar. Now, there's a few that exist, but they're not too sure whether they were on board Victory or not, because the serial numbers probably didn't have serial numbers on them. This one has got a serial number, and they can put it to this deck. Because it's a 24 pounder, we know it's on the middle gun deck. We don't know whereabouts on this deck it was. If it was facing to port, like it is now, it would have taken lives off the Busan Tear. If it was facing to starboard, it would have done exactly the same thing to the Redoubt. Either way, naval artefact, and it's a widow maker. Happy days. It's all good. Just people just think it's a big lump of metal, but there you go. There's a few things over there I need to talk about, and unfortunately we can't go over there because they've got all these barriers everywhere nowadays. But we can see from here as much as we can. As you can see where the hammocks are there, okay, they're all very, very close together. So you've got the little holes here, can you see them there? 18 inches apart, those ones there, that's where they're sling the hammocks. That's the amount of space they had, basically, on here as well. So this, where they sling these hammocks, will be all the way down the ship. So it'll be very, very, very smelly, very, very full. And of course down here on the lower gun deck, which is where we are now, the gun ports will mostly be closed. The reason for that is it's just above the water line. So the last thing you want is all the water coming in here, and of course there'll be lots of other stuff knocking around that they don't want to knock over, which I'll allude to in a minute. Now they were very, very dirty in those days. They try and wash the best they could in those days, but they didn't have much water to wash in. Right? So they couldn't wash their clothes in fresh water, for instance. And it was one of those things. So close confines, very, very smelly. So what they used to do is basically get into their racks, but before they did that, they'd take their clothes off to wash it. Now they couldn't use fresh water because there wasn't enough on board. All right, so they couldn't use salt water because salt water itself, once it dried out, it solidified, rubbed against the skin, it will cause infection. So they couldn't do that either. So what they used to do is get one of these buckets. Well, you know, some of the buckets over there anyway. There used to be loads here, but they've got the scaffolding in now. They'll get the buckets and they'll basically wing in the bucket. So urine they'll use, because urine would actually kill all the lice that's actually trying to eat away into their clothing. So they have to look after their clothing. So they wash the clothing like that, hang it up, get into their hammocks, sleep, get up, straight into their clothes, and off they go again. But because there's so many people down here and there's only 3 toilets either side, it might not just be urine in those buckets. So the last thing you wanted was all the water coming in through the gun ports, because you don't want it all over the place. It'd be quite nasty. Anyway, so that's that. And to build up all the ambience of that as well, a ship like Victory, should she come back to port again, she won't go alongside in Portsmouth, because all the ship's company will probably abscond. They'd leave. So you want to keep them on board. So you usually go to anchor off Spithead, so halfway between here and the Isle of Wight. So the anchorage point around there, that's where they'll be. Now, they're allowed to have their wives and girlfriends on board, but they weren't allowed to go and visit them. So they could have them on board. So if they had their wives and girlfriends on board, they had to stay in the same hammock as them. So, modesty will be out the window completely. So their wives and girlfriend will be with him in there, his wives and girlfriend in there, somebody else's wife and girlfriend with him in there. It doesn't really matter, because the modesty would have out the window, and it will just add to the ambience down here. It'd be quite nasty really, but it'd also be very, very smelly down here too. But anyway, got these big ropes down here as you can see, and these big bits of oak. Can you see those big bits of oak just there as well? Somebody's going off. You haven't touched that. You need to click that. Your audio guide. It's because you haven't used it. That's it. Right, because those big bits of wood there are called bits. That's where the end of the anchor cable will go to. Now the anchor cables themselves, very, very expensive pieces of rope. As you can see down here, you've got this big bit. This massive piece of rope here was the anchor cable itself, made out of natural fibre cordage. Very, very expensive. It's length of suit, whatever they could afford at that particular time. So that was the anchor cable. Now with the anchors themselves, when you put an anchor over the side, same with the ships today, it's not the anchor that holds the ship in place. The anchor actually moves the cable out. It's the amount of cable they put out which holds the ship in place. So it's all about depth of water, weather conditions, swell, tidals, and all that sort of stuff is all taken into consideration for the amount of cable that's put out in one place. Now this here itself is incredibly heavy to move on its own, but imagine having lots of water on that. It would be about 3 times as heavy. Right, so the anchor will take this over the side, the anchor will hit the deck, okay, and then this will lay on the seabed, and the amount of that there is what holds the ship in place, not the anchor. The anchor holds the cable in place, the cable holds the ship in place. That's what it's all about. Now the cables themselves are too big to bring in under the capstans. So they'll have a smaller rope like this called the messenger rope, and they attach that by little lashings called nips, like this. Now, to get those things in, they'll have to start bringing it in. But first of all, when you put the capstan, put your anchor out, you have to have a little loop around these bits here, because the cable itself is very, very expensive. If they lose a cable, one of these cables, the ship then would be able to move around at an anchorage, and you can't get another ship alongside to restore it. So what they tend to do is put anchors out on the 4 corners to hold it in place. So when they restore a ship, re-ammunition, whatever, it's very important for a ship to be able to do that. If they can't do that, that ship is then pretty much rendered useless. Once you've got rid of all your ammunition and all your food, they'll have to go. So they have to have all these things in position. So it's very important to keep the anchor cables themselves, and also very expensive. So, like I said, that's the bit, and on the end of the bit, so the end of the cable itself is called the bitter end, because it's on the bit. I think you know what's coming next, don't you? Right, pretty much. So once they get to a stage where they can't get the cable back in again because it's lost that loop, it's said to be at the bitter end. So they have to lose that cable, which then renders the ship useless. So it has to go back to port, which is not a great thing. So they don't want to do that, right? So that's where the expression to the bitter end comes from as well. But then back to this messenger again. So the messenger rope itself, like I said, is attached to the cable itself by using lashings called nips. So they'll do that for the hawse pipe, where it goes out from the side all the way to the capstan, which is usually down the back end, or this one just here, depending on where they use it. Okay, so we'll come to one of these. But because they couldn't put the actual anchor cable around the capstan itself because it's too big, it won't bite in. So that's why they have to use the smaller one, but they have to lash it on. So they have to bring it in like this. So the young lads, the little 10-year-olds, will go to there and put the lashings on, which are called nips, and then over to the capstan, untie it again. So it's then in a constant loop of tying these nips on and taking them off. So the young lads called nippers, because they put nips on. So that's where the expression nippers come from for small boys. So there you go. Every day's a school day. Right, follow me this way, please. We haven't got a lot of time, so I'm trying to do the best I can. Just point out the capstan to you here anyway. So, like I said, the messenger itself goes around here the actual cable itself won't, because it's too big. It would go round it, of course it will, but it won't bite on because it's too big. So I have to have the smaller one on there, and with the nips as well, helps it to bring it in, so then the cable will be taken to one side as it's untied, and moved away. Now, to get this in anyway, you've got these little holes, because you see in this capstan here, you've got two areas to this, all right? You've got the trundle head, which is this part here, and above the drum head. So you can man the capstan from two different positions, two different decks. Now this here, you've got 14, I don't know, 14 or 12 on this deck, is it? 14. 14 is one, yes. 14 holes in the trundle head, and on the drum head there's 12. Right, so each spar, similar to this, will go into there, and it'll come out quite a way. So you get 10 people per spar to bring an anchor in. Bearing in mind these anchors are incredibly heavy, with that cable as well, being 3 times as heavy as well, getting that in. And I'll tell you the amount of people they used in a second. Now, these wouldn't have been here in those days. They've been put in later time to stop everything falling on itself. And the ladders would be put up. So they'll be able to move around with these spars, 10 people per spar, 14 holes here, 140 people. Above 12 holes, 10 people per spar, 120 people, 260 people per anchor. So it would take them all day to get the anchor back in again, or get the anchors in. So Pirates of the Caribbean again, yeah, just need 5 people, get the ship ready. It's a load of rubbish, unless they're using an axe to get rid of everything to the bitter end. And that's the only way they could do it. But otherwise, you need 260 people to get these things in. But it took a long time to do. So follow me this way. Right, what I alluded to say to you down here on the lower gun deck, we've now got 30 32-pounder guns. So we had 12-pounders, 24-pounders, now 32-pounders, plus them 2 68-pound carronades. Right, so they're the different size of guns on board Victory. We don't call them cannons in the Navy because they're called guns. All right, they are guns, and that's what they are. The Navy call them guns, the Army call them cannons. If you take this off the ship, put it onto the jetty, the Army can then use it. You can call it a cannon if you like. But anyway, that's why gun wharf down there is called gun wharf and not cannon wharf. Right, because that's where the guns would go for maintenance and things like that, because they're guns, not cannons. Right. Anyway, I digress again. Now the guns themselves, talking about the firing rates. I'm talking about the firing rates now anyway. Said about the 2 different things, the Battle of Trafalgar, which made it an incredible victory. Cavalier tactics involved by, which were adopted by Nelson, because he wanted to break through the line as opposed to going side by side to use all his guns, and then broke through the line to rate them gunfire, etc., etc. So he wanted to do that, but also the gunnery as well by the Royal Navy, because they were practicing a lot and training to fight, training to win, job done, and that's what it's all about. And this is why the Navy today is still massively, the ethos on training is huge. All right, you've got to make sure you can do your job in your sleep, and that's pretty much how they do it nowadays as well. So training is very, very important. It was very important in those days, but the French and Spanish weren't as good, didn't train as hard, they didn't have the sustenance that the British sailors had at that time to move as quick as they could to actually do what they needed to do to fire the guns. But also the flintlock as well, as you can see on here. Right, you've got the flintlock just here. A lot of the French and Spanish guns at that time would have just the like a little hole, touch hole in there, use a little spike inside there, fill it with gunpowder, and use a slow burning match to light it. Now there'll be a pregnant pause to light it. Now think about when you're firing a gun like this. If you're not really well practiced at it, the ship's moving like this with the sea. You've got to try and judge when you want to light that so it fires exactly where you want it to fire. And that's where the practice and the training comes in as well. So that's where the petty officer of the gun needs to really judge that more than anything else. But the rest of the gunnery team need to try and, it's more about speed, trying to get as many projectiles out of this, firing against them before they fire back at you, because once they fire back at you, you might not be able to fire another one. So you need to get as many as them to stop them firing at you, and that's the idea. So, flintlock was a design by the French. It was designed in Paris, although many years before they had the flintlocks on the muskets. Of course they did, the rifles, but not on the big guns. So the French devised it, British spies saw it, thought it'd be a good idea, made a job lot for the British Navy at that time. French weren't too keen on it at that time, but they were starting to very slowly do it with their fleet at that time. So not many of their ships had the flintlocks on their guns. They would have, like I said, a slow burning match, so be blown on that. Oh, this looks red on there, it's good, isn't it? Right. Anyway, onto a bit of gunpowder, there'd be a pregnant pause before it went bang. Like I said, but if the ship's moving like this, it could be firing down, too far up, or some might hit. Now, Royal Navy, like I said, were trained a lot. They would fire one shot every 90 seconds for the Royal Navy on something like this. I know it doesn't sound very fast, but with a gun this size and what they had to do, it was mightily quick. Compared to the combined fleet, the French and Spanish, one shot every 5 to 6 minutes. So you're looking at 3 shots to every one of theirs. But every shot would hit home where a third of theirs would. I'd guess, I'd say. But also, the first shot you'll do, all dependent on what you wanted to fire, to be honest here. Now, to fire these guns, there were different munitions you could use. You'd use the shot itself, which is a solid steel ball. Now you see in these films, these explosions. It's a load of rubbish. It's made out of iron. Sorry, it's not steel, it's iron. That's not going to explode, is it? So where's the fire in that? You know, it's not going to happen. They're not going to have like them grenade things or fire it from these with the hollow ones with gunpowder in the inside, because it'll explode in the breech when you're firing it. You know, and also you've got a chance of having a fire on your own ship, so you're not going to do that, right? So they'll fire a solid shot, 32-pounder ball, which is that one there. It's a 32-pounder, it's a 24-pounder there. All right, we'll go out there. You could double shot it, so you'd have 2 of those. Usually the first shot they'll do on board before, you know, just as the battle starts, probably be double shotted. Try and get as much damage as they can in first time round with a big bag of gunpowder. Make sure that the bag itself will be absolutely full of gunpowder. That's what they'd want, okay, initially. But you've got that. You've also got the chain shot, which is this, and the bar shot. Chain shot and bar shot, pretty much using the same thing for the same reason. That'll fire and it will spin. Bearing in mind, it will leave the muzzle of this weapon just under the speed of sound. So it will start spinning like this. That's usually aimed at the masts, at the rigging, and at the sails of the ships to try and slow them down. So if you, in effect, you're trying to take out their main engines, so all their manoeuvrability will be impeded as well by that. So if you can stop them from manoeuvring around, you can get yourself around the back and rake it with gunfire, causing the devastation effect through the rear of that ship. And that's the idea really. And then getting alongside and then boarding, using your carronades, big red mist, get on there, happy days, you've got a ship, you know, and then that ship then goes and gets itself sort of maintained, and then that's part of the Royal Navy. So you've got more ships in the Navy. So it's all good. And they all make lots of money out of it. So anyway, digressing again. So there's a bar shot and a chain shot. You've also got this, which is the grape shot. Now the grape shot itself is lots of little balls like that, 8, 10, maybe 12 of them. Okay, small ones in there wrapped in canvas. So when the explosion in the breech happens, that canvas will dissipate and it'll be like a blunderbuss. Come out the end. Good for weapons like this when you're side by side with another ship. Because if you're side by side, gun port to gun port with another ship, and you're firing one of these, at least 1, maybe 2 could get through the gun port of that other ship. And if it does, it's going to bounce around inside that ship like a pinball machine. And whatever it hits, stays hit. Right? If it hits flesh, flesh is gone. It's as simple as that. Bone, snap, gone. That is devastating, okay, and it can be used in that respect, but also used with the carronades at top. And then you've also got this here. Come on, it's bloody cool now. Anyway, the tin there, full of musket balls there. All right, so that's all we're putting there. The tin will dissipate as well, and it's like a shotgun. Pretty much the same thing. You could use them down here, but mostly used up top before they board into the ship. Okay, canister, that's what it's called, sorry. So the canister shot there. So, to fire one of these things then. Now what they'll do is they'll have the men manning the gun itself. Usually for a 32-pounder, they'll have 14 people per gun, unless they're firing that side as well. So if you're firing 2 broadsides, they'll cut it down to 7. 7 on this one, 7 on that side. Now, same above here with 24-pounders, so either 12 or 6, and then the 12-pounders, 10 or 5. So that's what they did.